Nobody knows even why some houses are called haunted.
What would you call this place?
Well, diseased, sick, crazy, maybe. Such houses are described in the Bible as leprous. Before that, in Homer's race for the underworld, the house of Hades.
Hi everybody, this is Irene from the Paranormal UK radio show, the flagship show of the Paranormal UK radio network. Oh, that is a mouthful. I didn't stop there. Let me get my breath back. I'm here tonight with my co-host, as normal, the one and only Mark Johnson.
Hello.
Cousin, what did you know? I said that without a breath.
Well, it does help to breathe. You expand your diaphragm, let the lungs filled with air, and most of us do it several times a day.
Yeah, well, that knocked the stuffing out of me, boy, I can tell you. Anyway, right, come on then, Mark. So what's going on? Did they pull that little animal out of its sleep?
Yes, they did. They pulled the groundhog out on Sunday, and the little rodent did not see his shadow. So supposedly we're getting an early spring, and that was not only Puxatawny Phil in Pennsylvania, but also Staten Island Chuck said the same thing. They have two groundhogs. And considering the mild winter we're having here in the East Coast, I kind of hope so, because we haven't had much of a winter here.
Did they give them a shake? They're more than likely had their eyes still closed.
No, I have no idea. I don't watch these things.
Come on now. Be sensible. How are they going to say that they've seen their shadow? Are they going to speak it? No, see my shadow. How are they going to do it?
I think they have a translator there that speaks woodchuck.
Yeah? I have to have something, I tell you. I think it's one of the most... Well, it's tradition, isn't it? Let's face it.
Yes, it's tradition, and thankfully I missed being born on Groundhog Day by about an hour and a half, so if I had been born any earlier, I never would have heard the end of it from my family.
Yes, people, this is a hint from Markle Farkle. It was his birthday yesterday. He was 59 years old.
Subtract 3 years from that.
Oh, come on.
56.
Shut up. I've seen the wrinkles.
Uh-huh. Well, I have the wrinkles, but I'm still 56.
Well, you're looking good for it. Let's say that.
Oh, why, thank you. Thank you. Well, we've had a busy week since last week. I had to travel for my work to Kalamazoo, Michigan last week.
Yeah, Kalamazoo. I didn't even think it existed.
Yeah, strange name. Not much there other than the company I'm working for, although the countryside looks very similar to where I live here in New Jersey, so nothing too exciting.
Yeah.
How was your weekend?
Well, my weekend, we had the tree surgeons in. We've got 2 trees either side of the front gates at the bottom of the drive. They're lime trees. And they were getting a bit too big, so we've had them trimmed. I did say to them, can you trim my bush as well? But they said no. They wouldn't do that.
Yeah, I can imagine that got some strange looks when you mentioned that.
I was talking about my hawthorn bush.
Because I go right there. You just open the door, I walk right through it.
Oh, well, that's you, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Sick and twisted.
Do you know something? My son is in the south of France. My son is in the French Alps skiing.
Well,
he calls it work, corporate.
Well, it could be a tax write-off.
No. There's a lot of clients have gone out there as well, So he's out there having fun and doing whatever he does. In the French Alps, Mark.
Yeah, that would be nice.
so bloody jealous.
I am too. I am definitely ready for a nice holiday.
Yeah.
Hey,
But I tell you what, if work was like that, I wouldn't mind that sort of work. And that's all I can say.
Nope. Well, we could go take a holiday down in outside of Phoenix.
Phoenix, where's that?
Phoenix, Arizona. That's where our guest tonight lives.
Oh.
Of course,
John.
Yes. So why don't we go ahead and we'll just get right into the show. We're very happy to introduce. We have two people on tonight, both co-authors of the book, The Stardust Ranch. We have John Edmonds and Bruce MacDonald. Gentlemen, welcome to the program.
Hey, Mark.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me on the show.
Hello, everybody.
Always a pleasure. Now, John, of course, you're out there in Rainbow Valley?
Rainbow Valley, Arizona, about 35 miles southwest of Phoenix, Arizona, out in the middle of about 600,000 acres of wild desert.
And Bruce, you're coming to us all the way from Costa Rica, I hear.
Indeed, yeah, southern part of Costa Rica.
Oh, God, now I am jealous. I
haven't worn socks for 2 years.
Are you living down there permanently?
Yeah, more or less. I pop back to Canada every once in a while if I get a short work contract, 3 or 6 months, and then I have a Costa Rican wife, and so. But most of my living I make from on the mountain here, working remotely in software and telecommunications.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah.
Yes, I'm definitely jealous. Definitely jealous.
John?
Yes.
Have you still got the horses?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. We're still doing the horse rescue and sanctuary for a few different animals, a few cats, stray cats, a few dogs, one very obnoxious big red parrot. Yeah, we're still at it.
Oh, good.
Not to mention a few gray aliens that pop in once in a while.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but they're not here out of choice.
You had that parrot the last time we spoke, which was a few years back. Yeah.
Oh, I raised her from an egg. I've had her for over 30 years.
Yeah, I got a parrot as well. I'd like to put her back in the blooming egg, I tell you. Him. Pickles Pee-wee the parrot. A nightmare. He's out in the hallway at the moment because every time we have to do the radio show, he either rings his bell, squawks, or does something just to get attention. So he gets banned to the hallway while we're doing
that's what being a parent is all about.
a nightmare, isn't they? Nightmare.
Well, we're going to talk about, John, you've been on our show before, and I've had the opportunity to talk to you off and on over these last few years. You definitely, with your experiences down there at the Stardust Ranch, is one of those ongoing cases that just fascinates the hell out of me, especially since a lot of my focus these days is researching more towards these types of high strangeness, multiple types of phenomenon all happening at once. So why don't we start from the beginning and with the book, telling people, about the ranch, when you bought it and when things started to go strange for you.
Well, we bought the ranch, my wife Joyce and I, June 1st of 1996. And right from the very beginning, pretty much, things were weird. There was a lot of the weirdness, was here already for many years. And, it was interesting because we did a show with Ghost Adventures a couple of years back. And they actually went ahead and researched all the way from the very beginning of the origin of this property. And they were able to contact not only the original owner, but also somebody that got into the property and stayed here afterwards. And as it turns out, even though nobody really wanted to publicly acknowledge it, when Dave Schrader got hold of them, it came out that we're not the first ones to experience the kind of things that have happened here. They both confirmed on air that they had their own experiences and talked about it, and they were somewhat similar. They didn't call them gray aliens. They just called them spirits or ghosts or, various different ET type of strange, high strangeness experiences. But, for people that are, just regular normal people that, have never really been around this, most people don't know the difference between spirits, ghosts, demons, ETs, you name it. All they know is something's wrong, something's weird, and they're not too happy that they're having to experience it.
Well, it makes sense because it seems to me that whatever is going on there has probably been a part of that location for many, many years. In fact, who knows, maybe even going back at least 100 years or even farther. And the ranch was built on top of whatever the portal or whatever that is where these entities keep coming through. But, you've experienced everything from the gray aliens to ghostly type phenomenon to just other types of just very strange activity surrounding that ranch. Now, speaking of the Ghost Adventures episode, I don't know if you were aware, I think it was last week, they're running a companion show right now called Screaming Room, where they all sit in Zach's home theater and they rewatch episodes and just comment on it. And they did your episode. It was just a week or so ago. Did you get a chance?
I didn't know about that.
Oh, you did?
I knew that they reran the episode, but I didn't know. They've run it probably 7 or 8 times by now. But I didn't know that they had the companion piece that went with it. How did that go?
Well, they were commenting on it that, as usual, because this was the only investigation they've ever done that dealt with quote-unquote aliens, they still didn't know what to make of it at first with your stories. I think, when you talked about your stories and what you experienced, especially the killing of a few grays, I mean, they were just really taken aback by that. And they weren't sure what to believe, but then they started having all of their experiences there at the ranch, and they were being greatly affected by it. They saw UFOs, they saw shadows and recorded things moving in your house. They were affected by something. I remember Zach was holding your sword, and he was walking over towards Jay, and he seemed like he was in a trance, and we were like, Zach, what are you doing? So, yeah, it was still, watching the repeat was very interesting as well. But,
it's interesting, Mark, because they actually recorded a great deal more than they ever released. And I had an opportunity to speak to one of the crew that was there that night and experienced it firsthand. And she told me straight up that the best part of the entire episode was never released on TV, and that it was all edited out, and that they didn't feel comfortable releasing it.
Well,
and so, it's kind of weird that way.
That actually, and Irene, let me say this, and then you make your comment. Having done a few of these television shows myself and knowing the industry, this is not the first time I've heard of that, of people doing episodes of a show and the best evidence and best experiences are left on the cutting room floor. For whatever reason, the producers and editors, they decide to only show certain things. And it's very frustrating because you know that they've got a lot more evidence and they won't show it for whatever reason. And Irene, you were going to say something?
I was going to say exactly the same thing. From all the shows I've been in, the best parts have always ended up on the cutting room floor.
Well, they had a lot of direct evidence. I mean, they actually had an opportunity, from what I understood. They had a flying saucer that was directly over the ranch that they filmed. And, I mean, it was up close. Yeah, and I was told that directly by a crew member.
They didn't show that, John?
No, they never released that information. And
No.
I mean, apparently it went on for some time because apparently they got a lot of stock of it.
And the only thing they did show is at one point they just showed Dave Schrader seeing a light in the sky, and that was it. And then they just focused on more of the paranormal types of phenomenon, like hearing footsteps or seeing the shadows moving through your living room. But, you know, they really downplayed the alien aspect of it.
Well, maybe that's...
Well, and see, that was the whole thing. They had a remote trailer that was maybe 40 or 50 feet away from the house, and they were filming everything that went on in that room with the gal that was in the master suite when she was attacked. And the attack apparently was much worse than what they were able to broadcast. And the fact that it was simultaneous with the ship that was parked right over the roof of the ranch, apparently was, you know, just, I mean, this person I spoke to the next day was just, I mean, she just couldn't believe it. She said that they got some of the best footage they had ever gotten, maybe that anybody had ever gotten. And it was never released for whatever reason.
That really is frustrating to hear.
I think that might be part of the reason that they have such a high regard for that episode. Season 12, episode 12, I was told was one of the highest grossing episodes as far as their audience, watching. So who knows? I mean, you know, you do what you can and you see where it goes. That's all you can do.
Well, that's the problem with TV. It's one thing to do an investigation. It's another thing to come in and film a TV show. And, you know, they can come in and get a lot of great stuff. But in the end, it all gets handed over to the producers who decide what goes in, what goes out, putting together a 43-minute show. They could be there. I'm sure they were there for a few days, and only 43 minutes of it winds up on TV.
Well, we worked for that episode. We worked about 5 days, and I would say we worked 8 to 10 hours a day for that 5 days.
Wow. Now, since that episode has aired, I mean, it's been the last couple of years. What
Mark,
kind of... Yes?
It's Bruce.
Hey, Bruce, go ahead.
Did you catch the hissing sound in the Ghost Adventure episode that we described in the book? Did you hear it?
Yes.
You might have to Yeah. So that people ask me a lot about that sound, and I say it was actually captured in the Ghost Adventure episode. And John told me this 7 years ago. That's the sound they make when the first time we tried to work on the book. And lo and behold, 5 years later, you know, Ghost Adventures captures it. But you got to wonder why they would leave so much stuff on the cutting room floor. Who gets involved at that level? I mean, their whole thing is finding the spookiest and the most outrageous stuff out there on Ghost Adventures. Why they would leave, you know, good film on the floor or good video unedited is beyond me. You got to wonder what goes into that decision-making process. Take a moment.
Well, you know what? And this is something that we can definitely get into more detail on with your book, because one of the things that I was very impressed with the book, that really the last few chapters, almost the last quarter of the book, got into a lot of explanations on, you know, our society in general, the media, what we're allowed to see, and it would not surprise me one bit if some government lettered agency stepped in and told them you cannot air that footage.
Well, you know, it's real interesting, Mark. I actually have a friend here, Kim Carlsberg. She's of Baywatch fame and is a professional photographer and videographer, and she's been here with me on the ranch for the last few days. And she's been recording live video of things that she's running into. I actually have her with me right now, if you'd like to say hello to her.
Sure, we could say hello to her.
Hello there.
Hi, Kim. How are you? I'm Mark Johnson, and my host is Irene Allen Block, all the way from the UK.
So Okay.
Oh, my goodness. One of my favorite places on earth.
Oh, you've got to be kidding.
No. I love that part of the world. I think I've had many lifetimes there, I'm sure.
Yeah? Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I'll swap you this one to be where you are right now.
Well, it's definitely interesting, I'll tell you that.
Well, Kim, while we have you on, and we'll get back with John and Bruce in a moment, you've been there for a little while now. What kind of things have you been experiencing on the ranch?
Well, I'm a contactee from way, way, way back. I wrote my first book in, early 90s. And so I've had a lot of experience with many, many different types of ETs and the paranormal in general. And, when I came here, I was a little hesitant, because the Greys definitely aren't our favorite group of ETs. And I expected something very, very negative or weird. But in general, the energy has been very, very good to me. Although I have seen some strange things. I went out and tried to photograph the horses the other night, and this fog appeared in front of my camera, and there were, I'm making a new term. We call them sprites, like the drink. They're little entities that just shoot around at 100 miles an hour within this fog. I actually had a business in Sedona for 4 years where I would take people out and photograph orbs and paranormal, plasma beings, UFOs. So I'm pretty experienced at it, and I'm pretty sure that this is not dust. And it was a very, very clear night, and this fog just appeared right in front of my lens. And so I posted that on Facebook, and a couple other little things have happened. A coffee cup went from the kitchen sink to the bathroom sink. Very strange. Just little oddities, but nothing negative so far. I'm finding it very pleasurable.
And which is interesting because, John and Bruce, in the book, you mention how you eventually discover that these supposed gray aliens, and I say supposed, not doubting you. It's when we say aliens or extraterrestrials, I start to doubt those terms because, I'm not 100% sure that they're from another planet. They may be from the Earth. They may be from another dimension. I don't know. So it's all a matter of terminology. But you had mentioned in the book that this band you've been dealing with are kind of a renegade band. They're off doing their own thing.
Well, Mark, we have been told repeatedly, not only by individuals, but by, different people that were in various capacities, that a few years ago, maybe three or four years ago, the Greys were basically told that it was time for them to get off the planet, and that a huge majority of all the gray aliens ended up leaving, and the only thing that was around was just a few renegade bands, and that they were told in no uncertain terms that they were going to be subject to whatever the consequences were if they remained, and that there would be no relief for them. So apparently here in Rainbow Valley, we still have a large renegade band, and we're still dealing with them.
Bruce, was it the government that told them this?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
I think she said me. No, that information was given by Brandy Howe, and she comes in a chapter called July 31st, 2011. the date is the chapter title. Mark gets it. Yeah.
I must read this book. So Brandy Howe. Who's Brandy Howe?
She is. First, let me say it's a good read. I'm a capable writer, and this is material I enjoyed writing very much. I mean, the hardest part was finding a narrative to circumscribe 23 years and the incredible myriad of different experiences at the ranch. So the narrative structure I chose was just kind of an expanding circle, right? And because that's really what's happened to John's consciousness on the ranch. And so Brandy had been sent in to clean out the ranch, and not by John. A third party that was aware of John and Joyce's situation there in Rainbow Valley paid Brandy Howe, who does this kind of work, to go out and see what she could do. And she went out with a couple of Syrian walk-ins. You'll have to get the definition of that in the book, although we could get into it. This is a 2-hour show. And that's one of my favorite chapters of the book, and she was fascinating to interview as well. When I called her up, John and Joyce haven't really stayed in contact with Brandy since July 31st, 2011. And it was Mark can tell you, it was very dramatic for her. She had a bolt of purple lightning strike the ground about a meter. Sorry, I'm Canadian, I speak metric. But, yeah, sorry about that. About a yard away, a bolt of purple lightning hit the ground during this confrontation with the Greys. And there were other extraterrestrials present as well who were there to, let's say, back up Brandy and the two Syrians. And Brandy was profoundly affected by that. I feel a little uncomfortable speaking about someone's life experience when they're not on the call, but when I called her up, she said, I got permission to talk about this about 10 days ago. I started making notes. I said, you're kidding me. And she said, no. I said, wow, that's quite something. It's been 8 or 9 years, or 8 years, 8.5 years. And she was very forthcoming. We spoke several times. I recorded the conversations, and then I wrote the chapter. But that's what happened. A third party contracted with her. And this third party is in the book, and they were very well known in the exopolitics community as well.
There you are, people. Go out and get that book because it sounds exhilarating.
Now, I do remember in the Ghost Adventures episode, Brandy was in that episode, and they kept her part very minimal, and when it talked about the lightning striking, and then they just kind of moved on to something else. But in the book, you went into a lot more detail on how it greatly affected her both physically and emotionally.
Now, I don't like to do the fear thing, okay? And when you look at the exopolitics community, it's on a big upswing now in terms of energy. I think John Edmonds is right when he said that there is some kind of edit that was given to planet Earth to certain groups of aliens that have been abusing us since time immemorial, since our recorded time. And they are leaving, and you can feel it. If you're at all empathetic, you can feel, even though the news is getting darker every day, the world is actually getting lighter. What we're seeing in the news now is like the pus coming out of the body, and the boil and the zit, and it doesn't look pretty, but it'll be over soon, and we're going to be healthy. But yeah, so Brandy went out and she did her thing, and this was a very negative encounter. Now, the two Syrians she took with her, one took his family and went off the grid afterwards, and they all got visited by the men in black, according to Brandy as well. And she didn't tell me who or what they are. I mean, John's had his own experiences with them. He can talk about that a little bit later. It's in the book. They're not quite human, but they kind of look human. I get the sense that Brandy does know what they are, but she told me, that information's not the time to come out now. So one of the Syrians went off grid with his family and disappeared, and the other one went insane and had to be institutionalized.
Oh my God!
That's what you're dealing with there at Stardust Ranch.
That is just, it's mind blowing, and one of the things you mentioned that I was not quite aware of in the book, we've all heard of the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah, and the fact that Bigelow of Bigelow Aerospace, he purchased the ranch, owned it for a number of years, conducted his own research in private, never shared that information with anybody. And then but I didn't know that there was another ranch in between that ranch and yours. John, what was the name of that ranch again?
Bradshaw Ranch. I have a hard time remembering the name of it. Kim actually has spent a lot of time there. She knows that ranch real well.
Now, supposedly that was purchased by a government agency or whatever, but then like the Skinwalker Ranch, it has high security and nobody can get in there.
Yeah.
Well, the Bradshaw Ranch was purchased by the government, and it's pretty much gone by the wayside. The attention over the years has gone away from it. I used to do my tours there every night for 4 years, and it was a phenomenal portal. I mean, all wonderful energies there. There's a Bigfoot by the name of Big Girl that's been known to be there for many, many years. UFOs and, like I said, plasma beams and orbs, and just fantastic portal. But what happened recently is I believe it was leased by a university, and now they're turning it into a agricultural experimental, NAU. So now you can't really get to the portal anymore. The portal is pretty disturbed by all that new activity. But at one time, it was very, very powerful for many years. Tom Dongo is an author and researcher who had amazing experiences with the Bradshaws. So yeah, it's still there, but it's not what it used to be. It's not as active because of all the other activity, but it's there.
Now,
and I wanted to make one more comment when you were talking about using the term alien or extraterrestrial. Yeah. In my experiences, I have been taken off planet, and in my experiences, I would, just say that they're extra dimensionals as well as extraterrestrials, but primarily extra dimensionals. So that's my 2 cents on that one. Thanks.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, because that's, again, I've never really had much in the way of my own experiences with this phenomenon. Although about 2 years ago, I did see a big string of lights going across the sky, but now I think that they were a series of drones, because they mirrored that drone activity that was just happening over in Colorado, that happened just a couple of weeks ago, and looked very similar to that. But I felt definitely that what we're dealing with is mostly interdimensional. And our view of reality, what we think of as our reality, it's like the Matrix. It's a total fiction. We're conditioned from basically birth to believe in certain values, certain ways the world works, and there's all this other very strange and wonderful stuff out there that we're taught to ignore or not to believe. So,
Mark, the very often, I've seen these grays hundreds and hundreds of times over the 23 years that I've been dealing with this phenomena here. And, before they come into our dimension, very often what they will do is they will just insert their head and look around from side to side to see if there's any kind of threat. And if they feel that it's safe, then they begin to come through into our dimension. And I liken it almost to like an onion skin with lots and lots of different layers. And so what they do is they gradually pass into our dimension from wherever they come from. And then, the same thing. I mean, they disappear in a heartbeat, if they sense that there is any kind of threat. The various different, firefights that I've had with them have been such that, they kind of got caught, before they could disappear. And so it's kind of a remarkable situation. If you don't outright take the head and sever the antenna from whatever the body is connected to, then they remain. If they manage to disappear, it's because of the fact that you weren't able to separate the head. The head is like an antenna.
Now, with the time, how many of these grays have you killed over the years?
when I say 19, I say that with the provision that they were mortally wounded. Okay. It's not like I had 19 bodies that I was able to stash someplace in a great big deep freeze.
Right.
That literally where we actually had bodies was only a very small portion of that. But the normally speaking, even if they're gravely injured, they disappear. And I mean, they just instantly disappear. And usually they come in threes, and whatever mischief they get into, they all basically disappear simultaneously.
Now, what do you think they are in terms of these gray? Do you feel that they are actual living entities? I've also heard that sometimes that these the grays themselves almost act like drones. It's almost like I would liken it to a biomechanical suit that they wear in order to function in our reality. I mean, what are your thoughts on what they are?
The only thing I can tell you is from the ones that I have physically dealt with myself, and the fact that I was asked to take one and dismember it and then go ahead and ship it to Grass Lakes, Michigan, to Dr. Levengood. And I followed his instructions as precisely as I possibly could. And I can tell you from that experience that it was definitely some kind of a living being. It might have had some other components to it, but it was definitely a biological being.
Because there's, I'll bring up. I mentioned several times when we do our shows. I'll bring up Whitley Strieber and his books. He's the author of Communion, plus a variety of different other books based on his own experiences. And one of his earlier books, I think it was Transformation, where he mentioned being shown on a craft during one of his abductions. They pull open a drawer, and there's like a bunch of grays stacked in a drawer with a plastic sheet on them. And they seemed really excited to show him this. It's like, why is he looking at these dead grays? But over time, I started to get the impression that these bodies, and maybe they are purely biological, but I still feel like the bodies, these things operate on another dimension, and they need these bodies in order to function in our reality. And they can kind of come in and out of the bodies.
You're right. Let me comment on that. Something that really didn't come out in the book, but something I'm very aware of, and that is that, we always talk about having a soul or having some kind of manifest spirituality. And I'm not aware that any of these beings have anything like that, but what I would tell you is this, and that is that in order for a biological being to become animated, it has to have some kind of spirit of life put into it. And in a sense, the energy and the essence of life is something that these creatures have been able to, from a technological point of view, they've discovered how to manufacture that and put it into what would normally just be sort of a biomechanical frame and turn that into a life. And so that, I believe, is what they might have been showing Whitley.
Now, with the abductions and all the other harassment that you had experienced, especially in those early years when you first lived on the ranch, are you still experiencing that type of hostile activity? Do they still attempt abductions or take samples or harm you in any way? Or has that calmed down?
Well, it's calmed down. We actually have a sort of a new species that seems to be out here. I've only seen it a couple of times, but I did manage to photograph it. And Bruce just recently created a website, and I wish I could quote it from my head, but I can't. But I believe it has the photos of one of those species on there, as well as a photo of the large portal that's on the back of the property. And this race, or this being, I guess, because I can't really say it's a race. I've only seen what appears to be one of them so far. Appeared last May, just for no good reason at all, and right in front of me, a few feet in front of me, and I kept hearing in my mind's ear that John, take a photograph of it. Everybody always says, "Where's your camera?" So I grabbed my phone, and I very slowly took a couple of pictures of it, took 3 or 4 pictures of it. And so we actually do have pictures of it. I have no idea what it is, and I have no name for it. It just is what it is. So I would encourage people to we'll have to coax Bruce into giving us what that website is so that people can look at it.
Yeah, it's already in the chat for the show.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Wonderful.
You're on Skype, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, God.
It's kind of a complicated email address. Maybe if we have your permission, see what we do for the show is we do put up a promo graphic advertising the show for people. And if you want, and it's up to you, we can include that link in the advertising for people to go and check it out.
Sure.
Okay. We'll do that.
Yeah, it'd be wonderful. The thing about it is that this is, as far as I know, I've talked to a lot of people that have seen this photo, and nobody knows what it is. It is clearly a life form. It's sort of a translucent, and it's strange color. It's blue and pink. But you can see the eyes, you can see a jaw, you can actually see what appears to be teeth inside of the mouth in the head. And it's really quite remarkable.
Yeah.
Now this entity is new to the ranch, and
it is, and it is dominant. That's the point I was actually trying to get before I got lost there. It's a bit dominant in the fact that the second time it showed up, I thought to myself, well, as long as it's here, it must want to have some kind of interaction with me. And maybe I can convince it to, do something positive for a change instead of all the negative experiences that we have had in the past. And so I tried to communicate with it via sort of a telepathy. And I asked it that if it was here just to, walk around and share on the ranch and participate and et cetera, I had no issue with that as long as it didn't try to hurt me or hurt my wife or hurt the animals or do anything real negative. But if it was going to be like that and it wanted to be here, I asked it if it would provide some kind of domination over the other species that were here that had been so negative that had tried to hurt us and hurt the animals. And there was no, recognition of that message. But ever since that time, we have not had any kind of real negative, violent interaction with the Greys at all. I mean, we still see them. They're here. You'll see, out of the corner of your eye for maybe a brief second or two, but no hostility. And so right now we have sort of a peace here on the ranch, which is very nice.
Irene, did you have a question you wanted to ask? Irene?
She's muted there.
She must have stepped away for a moment.
I don't want to disturb the flow of the show, but there was a point about Bradshaw that I didn't get a chance to make, if I may.
Okay, be my guest.
The interesting thing to me, anyways, about the Bradshaw Ranch is that it was a completely normal place until 1992. It activated in 1992. Now, when you consider portals, the best human metaphor is a door of some sort, right? And doors open on two sides. So you got to ask yourself, why did it activate in 1992? What causes these things? And then to compare it to John's portal, although it didn't make it into the book, John has been told by qualified sources that that portal has been there at least 8,000 years.
8,000 years.
Yes. Did I get that right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yep, that's correct. And you know, the interesting thing again also is the fact that what we've been told, you know, it's not like we have, you know, vast experience with portals, but we were told that our portal is very unusual in the fact that it can go back and forth in time, not just in a spatial distance relationship to other portals that are on Earth or on some other planet or someplace in space. So, you know, apparently, you know, this is a I guess you would call it transdimensional, whatever. I mean, it can go, you know, it's a very powerful type of technology and very ancient.
Now, do you feel, and I think you hinted on this in the book, that the human race, what exactly am I going to ask here? The human race itself, there's been a lot of theories that we are a hybrid species ourselves, that we were created by more than one type of extraterrestrial or interdimensional race. And, you know, so basically some of these people or entities we deal with are creators, such as it is. Do you feel that we're still interacting with those races, or what we're dealing with now are different?
I think we're definitely dealing with many, many different races. I think what one of the greatest issues for humanity is the fact that humanity sees itself at the top of the food chain, and we're not, plain and simple. There are other races, many, many races that have been here thousands of years, if not longer, and they have been interacting with us much in the same way we interact with primates. You know, we just happen to be not so much the dominant species as the most prolific. And so, you know, there are many different species that live here amongst us. We have been colonized, for lack of another word, for a great deal of time, millennia. You know, so the idea that we're going to have disclosure and that, you know, one day somebody is going to come out of the White House and stand on the White House lawn and grab a microphone and disclose to the world that you know, we have discovered that we're not the only race is just laughable. There's a great deal of evidence that we've been sharing and cohabitating with other races on this planet, and probably many other planets as well, for a great deal of time.
Now, you've been on the ranch for 25 years now?
23.
23 years. 23 years. And in that time, when you first moved in, I mean, I remember the story, and of course it's recounted in the book, that the people that you bought the ranch from never moved their stuff out. And so you called the realtor and complained, and you and your wife went off to the movies and whatnot, and came back later, and everything in the house was in the pool. And all the furniture in the house was out in the pool. Now, one thing I wasn't aware of is that you mentioned that the realtor said he had nothing to do with it. So who moved all that furniture?
Well, we don't know. We have no idea. You know, the realtor didn't take any credit for it. And, you know, he never gave us any insight. And I did have many interactions with him afterwards. And you know, he never, in the several years, 5 years that I knew him afterwards, he never came out and told me what happened. So I have no idea.
Huh.
It's completely illogical, too. I mean, the appliances were worth money. You could have called a salvage company or, you know, Goodwill or some kind of place like that. You just list 4 or 5 of the items up for grabs. The truck will be in your driveway in 20 minutes. It was a no-brainer for the realtor to solve if the owners didn't want to evacuate the content there. So it's another mystery, right? It's just another mystery.
And that's something I should add, and by the way, I've never added this anywhere before, but the people that we bought the home from were from the military.
Uh-huh. Now, what about the young man who supposedly committed suicide in the house?
What would you like to know about that?
When did that supposedly happen?
I don't know what the date was, but he was allegedly the day before his high school graduation. And apparently he was a very popular young man, and he was an athlete. And, one can only, hazard to guess what the motivation was. But allegedly, the folks that owned the ranch, they were doing quite well. They were using it as a true ranch. They had cattle here. They had, young cows that they were, day-old cows that they would raise for 30 days and then turn around and sell them, to be butchered. And apparently it was a tremendously successful financial enterprise. And, that was sort of the beginning of the end for them. In terms of that particular incident, I guess broke the family will, and things went downhill from there, and there was all sorts of problems after that, and eventually they ended up abandoning the ranch.
Now, was this one of the families that you were able to, or when they were doing the Ghost Adventures, was reaching back out to former owners? Did they ever get a hold of that family?
I don't know. That was never shared with me. There have been a lot of different residents of the ranch. Not all of them were owners. At one point, this ranch was held by a militia group. At another time, it was a whorehouse and a brothel and off-track betting casino or place where they had off-street betting or off-track betting for horse racing, all sorts of things. I mean, you name it, it's been here.
Good Lord. Oh my God. That is so strange. It reminds me of there's a house here in New Jersey that goes back to the 1700s. It started off as a home and then became a multiple businesses, including a speakeasy in the 30s and a brothel up until, relatively recent times too. In fact, there's people alive who remember it as a brothel. Now it's been a multiple different types of businesses. So, but for a home that people have been living in for quite a while, I find that kind of history to be very odd. Now, in the time that
we're the only ones, Mark, we're the only ones that have been here as long as we've been here.
Hello?
Yeah, John dropped. He's going to have to dial back in. Yeah, he's. They're the only ones who've been out there for 23 years. Now, getting back to the. I'm sure he'll call back in. I'm not sure I'm not sure how that works with a phone. You have the auto merge for Skype, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to add him right now.
Okay.
Bruce, do you know how?
Bruce, hang on. Irene's asking a question.
I can't do it, Mark. I have to go and sort the dog out. I was going to ask Bruce.
Yeah.
Right? I'm sorry about this, and it sounds like I'm interrupting all the time, people. I am not interrupting. It's just I've got no control over the actual calls that are coming in. So I don't know when they're going to talk and when they're not going to talk. I'm not interrupting. Bruce, what I wanted to know was, how old is this ranch? How long has it been a ranch? And was there anything standing there before it was a ranch?
No. There was nothing there before it was a ranch. It was just property. I believe the original ranch was built in 72 or 77, if memory serves me. And
no, actually, it was 1977, Bruce.
77. Well, I gave one or the other, 72 or 77. Yeah.
So it's not that old then?
No, just after the Montreal Olympics.
But it's had a lot of activity there from the various people that have spent time there. There's been a lot of energy flying around by the sounds of it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this ranch has been known throughout the area for quite a while. It has been sort of a sore point for the local residents for a great deal of time. And I worked as a professional therapist, psychiatric social worker out here in the Rainbow Valley and the whole southwest area. And, I had a chance to meet a great deal of people through practice out here. And, when they discovered approximately where we lived, we didn't actually advertise our address, but we pretty much everybody figured out who we were. They were horrified that we lived here, just horrified because the place has quite a reputation.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of activity around us, not just on this ranch, but in Rainbow Valley in general. And so, the whole area is pretty much known for, the types of orbs and lights in the sky that the Phoenix lights, the Phoenix lights were March 13th of 1997. And so the whole area is known out here for this kind of thing. Arizona. Yeah, Arizona in general, as Kim says. I guess that's why, whenever they filmed horror movies in the 50s and the early 60s, they always seem to choose Arizona as the setting.
Well, there's a lot of mystical aspects to Arizona. I mean, let's face it, you have Sedona, Arizona, which is a real energy hotspot on the more positive side of things. And then you have your ranch, which for the longest time has been on the very negative side of things.
Well, we're working on that. That's one of the reasons Kim is out here. She's looking at trying to put some programs together that might change that.
Now, John, you had the ranch up for sale within the last couple of years. Are you still looking to sell the ranch, or are you going to hang on to it? What are your plans?
We're sort of open-ended. The actual sale of the ranch idea was sort of a lark in the fact that, my wife had decided that that we should probably at least toy with the idea of selling it. And so, we talked to a realtor who gave us lots of ideas, and she said that she could sell, ice to Eskimos. And so we said, okay, well, give it a shot and let's see what happens. And, it's not like you can do comps on a alien ranch with portals. So we didn't really know what to ask for it. But, the more we talked to people, the more they said that they thought it was worth what we were asking, which was between $3 and $5 million. And I guess that just blew up because the next thing we knew, we were on the cover of USA Today, and we had, every television station in Phoenix and actually from around the country coming out here to interview us. And, it was everywhere. I mean, it was on the news. It was, you name it, Stardust Ranch was everywhere.
Now, at this point in time, if you're not selling it, what do you want to do with the ranch? I mean, I know you had some plans at one point of trying to make it a research center. You're still living there, and are you going to continue to still live there? Or I remember you mentioned you were looking to move to Maine at one point.
Well, we have made some arrangements in Maine with some folks there, and so Maine is ultimately one of our destinations. But the problem is that you can't leave something like this unattended. And, my wife and I, it's just us. We don't have a family. We don't have employees. We don't have, a lot of folks that, could live here at the ranch, and maintain it and manage it for us. So right now what we're doing is we're discussing with different individuals possibilities. I mean, if I could just wave a magic wand and say, this is what I want for Stardust Ranch, what I would do is hold on to it, put some money into it to go ahead and fix it up and turn it into a center where we could use it not only as a clearinghouse for information that's real positive information on healing and, using the energy that's here for something really good. There is a tremendous amount of energy here, and energy is just energy. It's like fire. You can use it to cook your food, or it could burn your house down. It's really, whatever you decide to do with it. And, but the problem is I don't have any experience with this sort of thing. I'm sort of the bewildered bystander that's survived all this, but I'm not, one of these guys that has a lot of experience working with it or understanding how any of this stuff is put together. And, so we're kind of reaching out into the world and saying, if you're a special individual that knows how to do things that, could lend a hand, contact us. We'll talk. We're looking for alternatives. We believe that something like this is fairly unique. Certainly out of all the ranches that were in existence that were similar, those are all gone. We're still here. We're the original, we've been here 23 years. So, we know an awful lot about what happens here. We just don't know how to make the best outcome out of it. And so, that's where we're kind of at right now. We're trying to figure that out.
Now, you had also mentioned that we mentioned Robert Bigelow earlier, who bought the the Skinwalker Ranch, has also made you offers for your ranch, but you haven't sold to him.
Well, I believe in that a handshake is about honor. And I had made an arrangement with Robert Bigelow that if I allowed him access to the property and I allowed his investigators to come out here and spend hours and hours and hours out here, that he was going to honor his side of the proposition. And that was, the proposition was I would allow him to investigate and do whatever. But in return for that, they were going to provide us with a comprehensive report over what they found. Well, that never happened. We did our part, but he reneged on his. And consequently, there were hard feelings on our part. And that's where it stands right now. He made some absurd offers financially, and we flatly turned him down. And as we would do again and again and again with anybody, unless there was a good reason for it, to come to some kind of understanding. We need to be reimbursed for what we've got in it. We've got at least $3 million in it, and I'm not going to walk away from it for anything less than that. On top of that, there's a lot of other things here that have, we've discovered that are quite valuable. And so, we're going to want to be at some point reimbursed for that. Or, we want something that's equitable out of the situation. We're not greedy, but we put 23 years of our lives into this, and, we've really paid dearly for it, not only emotionally and physically, but financially. We're entitled to do something with it that helps us to, address that.
And with mentioning Bigelow, I know he's been appearing on a lot of different shows lately where people kind of turn to him as like an expert and they portray him very positively, and yet I feel the exact opposite about him. I remember, I don't know if you ever saw it, when Jesse Ventura had his show Conspiracy Theory, and they did an episode on the Skinwalker Ranch, and he looked into Bigelow, and some of the things that he found out about Bigelow and Bigelow Aerospace were fairly disturbing. The contracts that he has with the U.S. government, the fact that when he owned the Skinwalker Ranch, he collected all this data for years and kept it all to himself. What he did to you, come to your ranch, investigate, and then keeps it all to himself, doesn't share it with the public. There's something very selfish about that, and something rather insidious about it. And I don't trust him at all.
Well, Mark, we did lie detector tests. We did, reenactments on video of me dealing with the various different grays. They took fluid samples, body samples from grays. I mean, they got a ton of data, and they gave us absolutely nothing for it. And then Bigelow harassed us for weeks afterwards, many times a day, calling us and offering us money and trying to cajole us into selling it for nothing. And, quite frankly, I would have expected much better behavior from a man of that stature. he really dishonored himself, and he tried to dishonor us.
And he's another figure who, rather than clear the water, he muddies the water where exopolitics is concerned. I think that's part of his role, is to muddy the water. And he's provided no meaningful insight to the public based on the research he's done at Skinwalker and the reports he's done at Stardust. There's a lot of interesting rumors out there about Bigelow. So John is the experiencer, I'm the researcher writer. So one of the things that I did while I was working on this book, before and after, not exactly when I was working on it because I didn't want to infect the book, but I read a lot of material in the exopolitics world. I bought a number of EPUBs off Amazon and familiarized myself with what, people are saying. And one of the more interesting books I ended up reading, and I didn't read this until after I had finished the book, is a book that's titled Invisible Masters by Leo Zagami. I'm not sure if you're aware of him or not. He's got his own YouTube channel now. He's a relatively prolific writer. He claims to be, working for the good guys now, but he's a defector of the P2 Masonic Lodge in Rome, and is now living in Palm Springs, California. He pops onto the Alex Jones show every once in a while. Enough about Leo. Leo outs Bigelow as an initiate of the Temple of Set in Invisible Masters. And this brings a whole new dimension to what's going on in the UFO world. Because if you're paying close attention, there's only 2 or 3 principal narratives. There's the primary experience. It's physical, it's tangible. There might have been more than one people who saw it. This is where you get researchers like Richard Dolan, who is extremely effective because of his academic training. I'm not sure what his PhD is in. It might be history, but he's become a figure in the UFO world now. And he just does the sort of straight logical stuff. And then you have the experiencers like John, and then you have this whole magical group that has added their voice to the exopolitics movement. I would add Thomas Sheridan to this list. He's the Irish writer who broke onto the scene about a decade ago with a really well-written book about psychopaths and sociopaths. And, these people are saying things like, and I'm just throwing this out for conversation. Please don't confuse anything I'm saying with agreement.
Okay.
I don't agree with, yeah. But there's this narrative out there that the ET phenomenon is the result of black magic. And it goes back, and it's a very interesting thread in the narrative when you look at all the overlays between NASA and black magic. You get into Parsons here, Jet Propulsion Laboratories. You get into Aleister Crowley. You get into oh, Lord help me, what is the name of the guy that started L. Ron Hubbard?
Oh, yes.
Yes, and I mean, they were doing some pretty freaky things back then, right? They were putting 1-month-old babies in iron caskets in proximity to nuclear explosions to try and irradiate the child to create some kind of antichrist or something. Really wild stuff. I don't get into it too much. But the only caveat to add to this narrative about our book and what's going on at Stardust Ranch is that Zagami outs Bigelow as an initiate of the Temple of Set. Now, the Temple of Set was begun by an Army colonel named Michael Aquino, who was in PSYOPs. And he, under religious freedom in the Army, he made the Temple of Set a legitimate religion. So right away, you got to wonder what his agenda is, right? And I would just throw that caveat out there that he's an initiate of the Temple of Set, which is Michael Aquino, which is a very interesting narrative in the exopolitics world. I'll leave it at that.
Well, you mentioned like Richard Dolan, who I know Richard. I like him a lot. He's excellent speaker. He really knows his stuff. The only thing with Richard is I feel he's still part of what I consider the old school nuts and bolts MUFON community. And, he's been a big advocate of trying to push disclosure, getting the government to admit that, yes, there are aliens and UFOs and we do have downcraft. And, between him and Linda Moulton Howe, Steve Bassett, Grant Cameron, a lot of different people from that side of the exopolitics world, they still lean more towards this being nuts and bolts, crafts, people extraterrestrials coming from other planets, and government cover-ups, and then trying to get the government to admit it, which is never going to happen. It's just, it's never going to happen in the way that they want it to happen. Now, that's not saying that something really dramatic couldn't force their hand and they may not have a say in it anymore. And maybe one of these days, all of that will come out. But, the government itself will never willingly admit, especially the U.S. government, their involvement.
May I say something?
Yes, please, go ahead.
As I see this, the community that of individuals that you just remarked about, they were really in a position where they had to go from a historical point of view as far as everything that they were working with. And let's face it, 1947, is sort of a hallmark year for, the beginning of this entire subject as far as this work goes. And so pretty much, 60, 70 years here, everybody has been historically addressing all this. Stardust Ranch is the only real example of something that is ongoing with the original people that experienced everything, and it has everything. This story is like Walmart. I mean, it's one-stop shopping for almost everything in the phenomena, and I think that's hard for people to address because there isn't anything else out there like that. And so, you have sort of the before Stardust Ranch and after Stardust Ranch. And I think the whole world hasn't gotten to the point where they know how to handle this phenomena at this ranch yet, much less talk about it. And I think that's one of the reasons, that people really need the book is because...
Oh, they're interfering with us again.
This is no joke. Most people who say this on alternative radio are being paranoid, but we really are being interfered with.
Yes, we are. Because John still shows that he's connected.
Yeah. What we tried to do was, and I think we accomplished it in the book, in the last third, which you liked very much. You notice the chapters get much longer toward the end, right? And much more it's 3,000-word chapters for the first 12 or 14 chapters, and then they go long. And what we tried to demonstrate is that, look, this thing that people are calling the UFO phenomenon is both an inner phenomenon, very much like our religious or spiritual experiences, and there's an outer manifestation correlate to it as well. And this is a very real part of the exopolitics world that isn't really well spoken about, is that how much of this... Hey, John.
Hey, I guess we were validated by that interruption.
Yeah, that's what we were just saying, that we think you were cut off. But anyway, Bruce, finish what you were saying, then I got a question for John.
Yeah, so the book explains how, extraterrestrials are interdimensionals. They can manifest externally, phenomenologically, so that two people can witness it at the same time, fully awake with their eyes open. And then there's another internal component to it, which is unique to the individual's consciousness. I'm sure Kim could speak for hours about that if she's a contactee. Yeah.
Well, with what, and again, I'll just point out what just happened. losing John. We've lost John a couple times during this interview. And we've had numerous times when we've interviewed other people on this show of, it seems like, outside interference. And I was going to ask, before you dropped John, I was going to ask you about, the times when you were threatened. You had your Men in Black experience, and you were even shot at one point. A lot of people, experiencers have had, different groups, I should say, trying to silence them. And it seems like you've had your share as well. With everything that's going on nowadays, do you still get in the occasional threat or told to not tell your story or to shut up?
Well, I've been told that so many times, I've just gotten to the point where it's put up or shut up, and I'm not going to shut up, so I guess the rest is up to them.
Because, I'm going to mention one name that's very controversial, and everybody will have their opinions of it, but I'll mention the Stan Romanek. And, I knew Stan and his wife, Lisa, and I know that there were some things that happened there before he was arrested that I think Stan did some dumb things for whatever reasons that he explained to me in private why he did during a certain radio shows. But then the whole fact that he suddenly gets targeted and they supposedly find kiddie porn on his computer. After they've taken his computer, sit on it for a few months, and then they come out and say, yeah, they found this stuff. And what happens? He went to jail. And he was effectively silenced, discredited, his books out of print, everything. He's gone, and nobody will touch him or his experiences in the UFO or alien community. Yet there was so much that he experienced that other people around him experienced and validated. It's not just one guy's story who turns out to be a liar or, a pedophile, which my personal opinion is he was set up. But and set up and silenced. But they had
Mark, I think we all know that. Everybody that knew Stan knows that was just a bunch of BS. And, I look at it this way. Even if I were to disappear tomorrow, there are so many people from all over the world that have come to Stardust Ranch and had their experiences. They have, everybody knows that this place is a hotbed for, extraterrestrial activity, for paranormal activity. Regardless of whether we own it or not, that doesn't matter. It is what it is, and it's going to continue to be that. So, I don't. At this point, I don't really worry that much about, they're taking us out. We're going to die no matter what eventually. So, whatever. The bottom line is the truth is the truth. It doesn't matter whether anybody likes it or not, or whether they think we're full of it or anything else. It is what it is.
Now, when you've originally purchased the ranch, you were really the only property in the area, and since that time, they've built more properties around you, and you actually have neighbors. Have you had discussions with these neighbors, and have they had any experiences on their properties, or does it seem to be more quarantined on your land?
Well, I think from their point of view, they wish it was quarantined on our property, but it isn't. We know from neighbors, high school kids, the young men that have hopped over the fence and come over and knocked on the door, either so they could say that they had met us or that, they could brag about it or whatever. Apparently, there's a lot of other families in the area that have incidents. I don't know specifically what those incidents are, but I do know that over the years there have been shootings. There have been, all sorts of very negative experiences that have gone on. I hear I get blamed for it. I know one of my neighbors, and she's very nice, and she's come and talked to me a couple of times over the fence when I was feeding horses. And, everybody talks. I mean, we're the pariahs of, Rainbow Valley. Oh, well, too bad. Suck it up, move, whatever. But that's how it is. I didn't ask anybody to move out here. They moved out here on their own. Blame your realtor.
It was a toss-up for the afterword, the final chapter, between, giving Joyce a voice and documenting exactly what you just brought up, what's happened in there since other people have started to move in. There's an inordinately high suicide rate. There have been several murders, and we're talking about a population of 15 or 20 people. I mean, like 1,000% beyond the national average, even Chicago. And I attribute this to one of the first things I think that you experience with the Greys is it's and I don't mean to conflate two things here, but it's very similar to a demonic attack. There's a kind of anxiety that begins in your mind. And if you're not spiritually grounded, you could be easily led to dark actions upon yourself or others, is my opinion.
That makes sense. And in my own research, and again, my background has mostly been in paranormal research, and these last few years I've been changing my focus more towards cases like John and certain areas around not only the country but the planet that have these areas of high strangeness, things going on where multiple different types of activity. I mean, of course, you have the Skinwalker Ranch, but then there are places like in Romania, the Hayabachu Forest, which has had a lot of strange, multiple types of high strangeness and activities going on. There are these PowerPoints in the world, and Irene, you can talk a little bit about this, because of if you accept the idea of ley lines, of energy lines crisscrossing, a lot of these places have several ley lines going through it, and they seem to become like PowerPoints. You have that going through your property, Irene, right?
That's true. And I've got a mouthful of grapes. Sorry about the people. But that's very true. And look at the activity I get here in this house. Bigelow would love to buy my house. I'd love to sell it to him.
Well, you have everything in your house you have your 3 ghosts, but you've seen a lot of UFO activities in your valley there in Wales.
That's right, yeah. UFO highway here, boys. UFO highway in this valley. Llandareth Valley. And you can stand out there on a clear night and just see them going across.
Now, where I live here in northern New Jersey, which I'm about an hour and 15 minutes northwest of New York City, so I'm right up in the mountains of New Jersey. There are several areas up here and a couple of towns that there's something going on with these areas where there's something part of the land. And we did an investigation in this town called Bloomingdale, where there were several houses on this one street, all experiencing activity. 2 in particular that were willing to work with us, and we investigated. And it was this case I worked on for several years that started to bring me more leaning towards this multidimensional type of activity, to whether you're dealing with interdimensional creatures or extraterrestrials, interdimensionals. They seem to be interchangeable. The one client we had, she eventually sold the house because she couldn't stand what was happening there anymore. And, she mostly was experiencing what she thought was ghostly activity, but she would be seeing things all around her property, and it started to oppress her. She started to, her personality started to change very negatively whenever she was in the house. And I watched her one time. She was like a nervous wreck. Total nervous wreck in the house, and she walked right outside, and it's like somebody flipped a switch and her personality changed, and she was calm and normal, like nothing was wrong. And that's when we started to realize there's something with the land. And I even lived in a house up here in Sussex County in this place called Glenwood, where there's a mountain, and on the mountain, the house we lived in, we had paranormal activity. We had nothing we ever did worked right in that house. We had other neighbors that had complained about having experiences, and I think this is all related. What you're dealing with there on your ranch is much more intense, of course, and you're definitely dealing with the grays, but it makes me again think of, instead of looking at the term extraterrestrial, because one time even the client in the Bloomingdale house, she called me one morning and she said, "Mark, you're not going to believe what I saw last night." And she was afraid to tell me, and I had to coax her out. She said she saw this white figure standing by her dresser in the middle of the night, and she made a noise, and it turned around and looked at her, and she said it looked like a gray alien. Now, that was the one and only time that she ever saw anything like that, but it makes sense. And again, I kind of relate that to what's going on at the Stardust Ranch. They weren't seeing a lot of UFOs out there, but these types of beings, entities, or whatnot, I think are very intermixed to what's going on in certain locations all around the country, and of course all around the world.
Well, Mark, I think also there may be a military aspect to this, because over the years there have been incidents that we've experienced where you kind of, when you've been through it enough, you can tell sort of the difference between dealing with an ET and dealing with sort of a wannabe ET. And I mean, that's what I call them. And I have a feeling that maybe some of the, what I call wannabe ETs, are actually some kind of military application of technology that has been made to appear maybe to be an ET. And until like the last year, I really never would have ever considered that. I would have just said, yeah, it's positively, absolutely all ET, and left it at that. But, we regularly, every single day at certain times during the day, we are very aware of the fact that the ranch is being targeted by some kind of energy, and the dogs react to it. You can feel it if you're sensitive. So we know that there's things that are happening out here. We've had people like Carrie Cassidy, who she blatantly just comes right out and says, "John, you live on top of a base." So there may be some truth to that aspect. I don't have any direct information about that, but Bigelow even came out and told us that there was something under the ranch. That was the one thing that he would say. He wanted to dig up the ranch because he thought that there was something under the ranch that was a very extreme energy source. He didn't know what it was, or at least he didn't share it with us. So there's a lot more to the Stardust Ranch story than we as the residents are aware of directly. And apparently there's information out there that kind of confirms this, but we don't know what it is because nobody's telling us.
And see, when I've spoken with you in the past and reading your stories and understanding your story, I've always got that impression that what you're dealing with isn't coming from the sky, it is coming from underground. And there are a lot of different theories out there about a lot of these entities and beings being underground. And you'll see lights and UFOs disappearing in mountains. There's the, oh, good Lord, what's the name of that ranch in Washington? In Washington.
ESETI?
Yeah, the ESETI Ranch.
That's James Gillian's ranch.
Yes, the Gillian Ranch. Where they've seen these UFO craft flying in and out of the mountain and flying underground.
We've seen that as well.
So, which is where I think they're not like parked up in orbit and flying down and doing stuff on your ranch. Where this portal is, it's underground, or again, with the portal that's on your ranch, they're using it to come into our world in your ranch. Now, the portal itself, does it have a specific location? Is it out on the property? Is it in the house? Or does it seem to encompass most of the property and things can happen anywhere?
Well, we have two of them, and there's probably a great deal more than that. We had a team from Mount Shasta a few years ago that came out that will remain nameless, and they brought 2 or 3 trucks full of exotic equipment to be able to test things and to be able to interact with the energy that was here. And at one point, they had a device that they laid out in a grid work across a good part of the front 5 acres. And when they turned that on, all of a sudden the ground looked like Swiss cheese. It had many different portals. I mean, I was almost afraid to walk because I thought I was going to fall down into a portal. And it was, I mean, you know, I've been here a long time and I've seen a lot, but of everything I've seen, that was one of the more shocking experiences that I've seen, because it really kind of gave us an idea that there's a great deal dimensionally more than what we're capable of being able to perceive. And so, yeah, I mean, there's just all sorts of weird stuff here.
And this kind of goes back, Bruce, with the last third of your book, as we were talking about earlier, which was really focuses on, and again, I highly recommend people, if you get the book, to read this, not only for John's experiences, but also for the research that they've done and the things that they're looking at in terms of our society, our government, our media, and how we are conditioned and to be, I don't want to use the word slaves, but, you know, we're definitely being controlled, and our thought processes are being controlled. You know, the media itself, how whenever they treat this incident, somebody who has one of these experiences, it's what a good friend of mine, Bruce Pearson, always called the snicker factor. You know, there's always, you know, they say it tongue in cheek. They'll tell the story, but then they make jokes. They'll play X-Files music, and they do what they can to demean and diminish. What was that?
Belittle it. I mean, I went from being somebody who was, you know, very well thought of in my field professionally, to having to deal with every kind of ridicule, every kind of insult, every kind of, you know, being called, you know, you name it, from, you know, this, that, and the other, to the point where I've just gotten to the point where I really don't even pay attention to it that much. You know, it's, you know, to stand up and take responsibility, love your country, be a patriot, and to be somebody that says, you know what, I'm not going to knuckle under, I'm not going to give in, I am going to resist, I am going to stand up for what my constitutional rights are, and I'm going to defend my property. I have been treated as if I was an absolute, you know, just a crazy person. And, you know, considering I come from a mental health background, married to somebody who worked for the FBI, and I worked in the superior courts, I've worked in some of the you know, most dignified organizations in America. And to go through what we've gone through at the hands of the media, at the hands of, you know, people in, you know, just in general, we've been crucified for this. And, you know, it took a lot, you know, a lot for us to stand up and do it. But I'm glad we did it because it was the right thing to do.
In the book, and Bruce, maybe you could talk a little bit more on this, is, you know, Dr. John Mack, who is very well known in the ufology community and for the work he did as a hypnotherapist at Harvard. And, you know, he wrote 2 books on the subject. He worked with hundreds of different contactees, abductees, doing regressions, and he's very well respected. And of course, he died under very suspicious circumstances, almost like he was taken out. And then shortly afterwards, and you, for refresh my memory, this woman who took his place basically has been doing everything she can to diminish, demean, and debunk everything that he ever did.
Yeah, that was an academic double tap. I mean, they took John Mack out with extreme prejudice. I don't know, I could call the book up, but there's a quote from the dean of the School of Medicine about the absurdity of even researching what Mack researched. He's the only professor, tenured professor, in the history of Harvard to have a committee assembled to investigate every aspect of how he works, his data gathering process, how he filtered material, how he came to conclusions. And then, so they were on him while he was still alive. He had some very interesting things to say about abduction. And again, this ties in as we build up towards the end of the book, where John Mack said that these abduction experiences are very similar to what used to be spiritual experiences people used to talk about. And he says they sort of dry up at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, so when it gets really off and running around 1890. And he's absolutely right. You can watch the slow death of the human imagination, which is an often dismissed and ridiculed faculty within human beings. But imagination it's extremely important, as far as I'm concerned, to spiritual growth, to all kinds of things. So Mack and both Mack and Carla Turner would not say that these are alien abductions. They said they don't know what they are. I don't know what they are either, even after writing this book with John. But Mack died in London. Many think that he may have been killed. A lot of people speak very openly with conviction about that. I don't have an opinion on whether he was killed or not. It's a very suspicious death. Now, getting back to what happened at Harvard, they had this academic a couple decades younger than him, and they were grooming her, in my opinion. These are just my opinions, but you can read it in the book. They were grooming him to discredit her. So she did a follow-up work, and Harvard wanted to publish a follow-up work of John Mack's work. They wanted to critique it themselves because they were embarrassed that this guy even went down this road. And she published this book saying that basically alien abductions are repressed childhood memories, and it's a trauma. And she cast extreme aspersion upon Mack's data gathering and the use of hypnotherapy and things like this. And she did a follow-up work, which I found absolutely staggering when you start to tie the occult and the exopolitical world together through what we talked about earlier, like the Temple of Set and Bigelow and things like this. Lo and behold, she writes a book suggesting that sex with children doesn't harm the children. What harms them is coming to an adult realization of how society views what was done to them. Now, isn't that an odd concatenation of two things to study, don't you think? Because, we haven't talked about this in any of the interviews, but this pedophilia epidemic could be easily raked into the exopolitics conversation. Easily.
And again, we're not a political show, but you know what? You're absolutely right. And we've had everything from Pizzagate, which is they did everything they could to debunk it, but then you had Jeffrey Epstein, who was going to be on trial, and then, of course, he didn't kill himself in his cell. Oh, did I say that? Yes, I said that. He was taken out before he could turn in the other people. And look at all the famous people that he used to shuttle off to his island, which, he had underage girls. And this whole cabal of people who are in power on both sides of the aisle that have been running this country, and the sickness of pedophilia, even going with everything that the Catholic Church has been going through these last couple of decades, and the exposure that they've been getting, it's thoroughly disgusting. And yet there are people like her who are trying to come out and normalize it, trying to make it seem like it's not such a big deal.
And coincidence of coincidences, do you know where Susan Clancy lives now?
Can't say as I do.
She's a fellow expat. She's a fellow expat with me in Costa Rica.
Really?
Yeah, she teaches at some satellite American university in Costa Rica. She remains a fellow of the Harvard Medical School. She liaises with them, but she's down here. Now, I live in the country in the mountains. She lives in the city in one of the nice suburbs of San Jose.
Very interesting.
It is, isn't it? Yeah. And that was, catching the Mac Clancy story is something nobody in the exopolitics world caught. John and I got lucky doing the book. We spoke every day for a minimum 1 hour a day when we were working on this book. I'm sure John got his fill of Bruce MacDonald, but I would say, John, you're never going to believe what I just found out. And nobody caught this. Not only did Mac die unusually in London, but nobody caught the whole Susan Clancy thing. And what it showed to me, and again, I realize this is not a political show, it's an exopolitics or paranormal show, but look, when we talk about control, we talk about, the military-industrial entertainment complex, but the network is much wider than that now. I mean, they've got all kinds of intelligence operatives in academe now, especially the Ivy League. And like I said, that was a double tap. I mean, they metaphorically put two bullets in the back of John Mack's academic career.
Yep. There's, and I've brought this up several times because I feel this movie was very prophetic in ways that John Carpenter never really realized and intended, but his 1988 movie, They Live. I don't know if you ever saw that movie with starring the wrestler Roddy Piper, but yes. That movie is more relevant today than when it was released, because when Carpenter wrote it and directed it, he was trying to make some social commentary, not realizing that he was hitting the nail on the head on what we're dealing with in terms of the military entertainment industrial complex, as you put it. Or I also refer to Richard Dolan talks about the breakaway civilization or the shadow government. The people who are really pulling the strings, not our public politicians, but the people who have the real power. I have a feeling that that's one of the reasons they're going so apeshit over Trump in this country. And again, you know what? This is not a political show, but I'm just going to say my piece. I've never seen a political party go after somebody so hard and so ridiculously to get him thrown out of office, instead of just, hey, run against him, try to beat him. And for every little thing. And I think it's because he's an outsider who's come into their system, they can't control him. And they're freaking out about it. And, whether you love Trump or hate Trump, again, that's your opinion. The people, again, not trying to make this political, but just I'm seeing it, calling it like I see it. And I liken it to what we are discussing in terms of the amount of control that they're trying to have over the public, that we are now more divided than ever, which that's how you divide and conquer. One of the oldest, military strategies in the book, divide and conquer, get people separated. We now are more racially divided than we've been since the 1960s. We're being told how there's all this different discrimination going on right now, and everybody is turning against everybody else. And I think it's all being done on purpose. I believe that it is part of a plan of destabilization, and when you destabilize the public, you can find the ways to control the public.
But Mark, the more people find out that they're different, the more they end up coming together and realizing they're the same. Because we're all Americans here. Not Bruce, but
Well, it's It's not even.
He's an honorary American.
Yeah. Well, you know what? It's not even just being Americans. It's being human beings and part of the world. And instead of, being so divisive, trying to find more ways for us to come together, because we are one species. We are all together. We are a human family, and everyone trying to break off to be their own little niche and subgroup. And I want my rights. I deserve to be recognized for this or that, whatever. I'll go to look at a quote that Stephen King, the author, got really ripped to pieces on Twitter when he was talking about the movie award shows and the fact that he didn't care about diversity. He cares about talent as artists, and that's the way it used to be. It's like you celebrate the artists who do the best work, and he got ripped to pieces because he was saying, not supporting the whole diversity movement, saying, well, we need more diversity in the award shows. Well, I can understand, yes, more people of color and women and diversity should have more opportunities to express their art and whatnot. But, if what is produced in a certain year is going to be recognized, it should be recognized for the artistic ability, what the outcome of the product was. And and he comes from the extreme left too, so it's very interesting to see this dynamic that if you speak up and speak your mind these days, you're shouted down. Well,
I noticed nobody's written The Stand or The Shining or any of the other great achievements that Stephen King has done in an awful long time. And so I guess I always look at this and I say to myself, let's recognize talent. Let's recognize, achievement in terms of significance. I don't think the rest of it is necessarily as important. If you're having an award show, why don't you give an award, for what it's about? I don't see why people get so cornered on all these differences. Let's look at the things that we're about that are the same, similar,
Not to
let's celebrate that.
Not to derail the discussion or go way out in left field, but one of the things that I've always talked about, and there's this filmmaker, Christopher Garetano, who did a film on the Montauk Project. And we've spoken with him before. He just recently had his own series that was out, I believe, on Traveler History, looking at not only the Montauk Project but other types of programs. And one of the things I've noticed is ever since the 1980s, when political correctness started coming in, and you could start to see the societal conditioning starting, and they've had 30 plus years, almost 40 years, to indoctrinate new generations to have a more. And again, I'm not putting down liberals or liberal thought because I have a lot of liberal ideas myself, but they're pushing people to these extremes and extreme forms of thought, which is you can't have another opinion. You can't have free speech. If you don't agree with what I say, then I'm going to shout you down or beat you up or whatnot because my way is right and your way is wrong. And it seems like it's slowly happened over the last few decades that we've now reached this point, and I feel it was intentionally done. That to condition a whole generation or a couple of generations of younger people to be where we are now for that control.
Oh, controlling the narrative.
I totally agree. And a lot of people have difficulty with this, imagining organizations that could think this long and deep, like 20, 30, 40, 50-year plans. I was born and raised in Ottawa, the capital of Canada. Believe me when I tell you, governments plan this long. And although I'm not sure what amount government plays in this, I think, they're not the producers and the directors. They're the actors. We don't really know who the producers and directors are behind this human narrative that they're trying to propagate. It's one of the great mysteries. They certainly know who the extraterrestrials are. I have no hesitation in saying that out loud. They're not offering us any clear, rational explanations. But, yeah, these long narratives, and there's been, we touch in the book, there's been a huge exopolitics narrative that really began in World War II. And it's absolutely fascinating. It brings in the Cynthia Crawford material and all of these things in the book. But the exopolitics world and how we view this topic changed dramatically after World War II, based on what it was discovered the Nazis were into. So, and there's all kinds of theories out there in the exopolitics world. Joe Farrell is a really excellent researcher. The Nazi bell and things like this. And again, you get this very weird conflation of exopolitics and the occult. I mean, the Nazis seem to circumscribe all of it. And as we discuss it here, 75 years later, it gets broken down into different subject groups. We're going to talk specifically about flying saucers. We're going to talk specifically about the occult. But really, after doing this book with John, I sort of lumped them all into one category that I just call the lower fourth dimension or the lower astral.
And that makes perfect sense to me. It's all more connected than people realize. You were mentioning earlier as part of the book when the industrial age really got going. I mean, just before that, we were in the Victorian age. The Victorian age is when spiritualism was really popular amongst a lot of society and upper echelons of society. Mediums were in high demand with seances, people looking into that spiritual world. But then once the Industrial Revolution started and we started looking at everything from a mechanical point of view, and then science took over, and science came in and tried to explain away what they look at as just fantasies, fairy tales, and they poo-poo everything. And now you get most scientists, if they can't look at it under a microscope and test it in a lab, and they won't believe it. I was listening to an old Art Bell repeat the other night, which I enjoy doing. I like his old shows. And he had this woman on there that he was talking to who was a scientist, and she's very skeptical of everything, including, the soul, the spirit, of maybe possibly reincarnation or an afterlife, because she can't measure it. She can't put it in a laboratory. And so she has to remain a high skeptic. And I think that's another part of the control that they're trying to introduce in diminishing.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And belittling the thoughts of these different types of entities, creatures, dimensions, you name it, ghosts, whatever. They let science be the new religion.
It is nothing short of an attack on human consciousness is what it is. And, we explain this really well in the second last chapter of the book titled Crossroads, where, human beings are an electromagnetic creature. Electromagnetism is the taboo science. It stops pretty much publicly with James Clerk Maxwell in 1875. What's going on at John's Ranch, I'm quite convinced, is an electromagnetic anomaly that creates the portal. And then you bring neuroscience in and neurology, and then you bring in these thinkers like Richard Dawkins, and they're really trying to hammer this home. You live, you die. Consciousness does not exist beyond the biology. I'm convinced they know differently, right? And so I take this as a spiritual attack on the human race, and it really ramped up about 130 years ago. I think we really nail it in this book.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I was very impressed with the book and how you approached it, and the great amount of detail that you were able to present for your argument, showing what it is that we're dealing with here and how society, especially Western society. Now, you can still go to the third world countries or even here in the United States, you know, to the Indian reservations and talk to the native peoples with their belief systems. And, you know, we poo-poo it. We say, oh, it's ridiculous. But yet I believe that the Aboriginal, native people, pagan people are more in touch with this reality than most people are in Western society, because we've been conditioned to turn our backs on it.
Agreed. Yeah, agreed.
Now, we have just a couple of minutes left in the program, so John, do you have any last thoughts on, and you know, what do you want to see happen with the ranch coming up here in the near future?
Well, we're like I said, we're kind of discussing that. We're looking for people that you know, want to get in touch with us. I basically feel that the ranch is a draw. It's a real magnet for people that feel a calling in life to do something. And very often what happens is people just reach out to us and they say, I'm not really sure why, but I have to come to your ranch. I need to speak to you. Can I please speak to you over the phone, whatever? And, you know, I usually allow that. I mean, there are a few times people have sounded a little bit off base, and I've you know, been shy about that. But for the most part, I'm different than most of the people in the paranormal field. And that is that I actually treat people like people, and I actually deal with them directly. And that's, you know, from my counseling background, probably. So I can see us continuing, you know, down that path to some degree. We'll see what happens. I you know, right now we don't have a stellar, you know, program in terms of exactly what we want to do. We're trying to figure it out.
Now, the book is Stardust Ranch, The Incredible True Story, again, and we've been talking tonight with John Edmonds and Bruce MacDonald. Now, Bruce, where can people find this book?
It's on Amazon. You can do an author search for John Edmonds or Bruce MacDonald, or just the title will bring it up. Stardust Ranch, The Incredible True Story. If you want a hardcover, you can go to lulu.com and look for the same title, and they'll print that and deliver that to your home in about 7 to 9 days. But principally Amazon is where it's at. You have to kind of enter into a proprietary relationship with them to maximize the royalties.
Mark, can I do a shout out for Hopeful Hooves as long as we're doing advertising?
Absolutely, yes.
To your audience, I do an animal rescue and sanctuary. I've done it for many years to save abandoned and starving animals. And it's called Hopeful Hooves. It's a 501c3 charity, so any donations that are made to us are tax deductible. You can mail them directly to 14700 South Tut Hill Road, TUT, HILL Road, Buckeye, Arizona, 85326. That would be the ranch address, and I will send you a receipt, and I will be very personally very grateful to you. You can also go on PayPal and go to Hopeful Hooves and make a donation there as well. And God bless you for doing it. Thank you.
Well, John and Bruce, and I also want to thank Kim Carlsberg for also coming on tonight and talking with us. This has been an incredible show. Very impressed with everything that we've talked about tonight, and I wish you a lot of success with the book.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
And Irene, are you there to help us take us out here?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. Yeah, I know. Irene hasn't been able to participate much tonight because the Skype connection and the phone call is just plays havoc with her over in the UK. So she's unable to really jump in a lot. So don't think she didn't want to participate, because she does, but it's been kind of difficult on her end.
And plus, it's hard to get a word in when Mark's on a roll.
Oh,
but
yes.
Very, very, very good listening to you. Very interesting.
Thank you.
Well,
thank you very much.
Well, I want to thank everybody for tuning in to another edition of Paranormal UK Radio here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. We also air on Monday evenings on Art Bell's Dark Matter Digital Network. And Irene, where else can people find our show?
Just about everywhere. Everywhere. We're on all the platforms. We're up in the clouds. We're everywhere, people.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, everyone. Have a great evening, and we will catch you all next week. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.